let's start off with who I am. So I'm Mark Milkey, the president and founder of the Aristotle Foundation for Public Policy. I'd like to welcome you all tonight. Thank you to our sponsors, Viewpoint Investment Partners, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and the Alberta Institute. So let's give them a hand. Thank you. Our debate resolution. Be it resolved, young Canadians under 30 should leave Canada. Why this resolution? Because from the board to the staff, to our scholars and supporters, we started the Aristotle Foundation to help renew Canada on a number of fronts, free inquiry and free expression being among them. But it would be difficult to renew Canada if many of our best and brightest, youngest Canadians and entrepreneurial types leave. So without further delay, let me describe our debaters tonight and then we'll get right to it. Lawrence M. Krauss is a globally celebrated theoretical physicist, best-selling author, and president of the Origins Project Foundation. A New York Times best-selling author, his newest, just-released book, including in Great Britain just today, but it's been out in the United States and Canada for about a month, is a collection of chapters on science from 39 contributors, entitled The War on Science. Raised in Canada and educated at Carleton University, he pursued doctoral studies at MIT and held prestigious appointments at Harvard, Yale, and CERN. A defender of intellectual curiosity, Krauss writes for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Globe and Mail, and the National Post. And he hosts the Origins podcast. Dr. Krauss has moved back to Canada and will argue against the motion. Thank you for being here, Lawrence. Rupa Subramanya is an Ottawa-based economist and journalist writing for the Free Press. With contributions to the National Post, Wall Street Journal, India, and Foreign Policy, Rupa brings sharp insights to Canada's economic and social challenges. Rupa will argue for the motion. Let's start with the resolution and with, Rupa arguing for the resolution. Be it resolved, young Canadians under 30 should leave Canada. Rupa, you're on for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mark, for inviting me to argue in favor of the motion. Thank you all for being here as well. I look forward to a robust and engaging debate with Lawrence. It's also great to return to Alberta and Calgary in particular, where last night I had my first real bourbon in months because Doug Ford in Ontario believes that he decides what we should drink and when we should drink. So it's nice to breathe some libertarian air here in Alberta. My case is very straightforward. If you're under 30, ambitious, hardworking, and want to succeed at the highest level, you will find greater opportunities in the United States than in Canada. Here's why. The numbers tell the story. When I came to Canada nearly 30 years ago, Canada's per capita GDP, adjusted for exchange rates and cost of living, was 85 to 90% of the US level. Today, the average Canadian makes just over 70% of what the average American makes. This is not progress, it's decline. The root cause of Canada's economic decline is poor productivity growth. Since about 2000 or so, Canada has averaged just around 0.8% productivity growth, and it's actually been zero in recent quarters. The US, by contrast, has averaged closer to 2% or more, widening this output gap, and therefore the gap in living standards between the two countries. And then you add record levels of immigration, that too, low-skilled immigrants to a stagnant economy, and you're slicing the same pie into thinner pieces. The consequences for young people, that's why we are here, are stark. In Canada, under 34s make about $41,000 US. In the US, that's nearly $60,000 US. That's more than just a pay gap. That's a border tax on ambition. A young Canadian earning $60,000 US hands over close to a third of their pay in taxes. In the US, that same worker keeps more, about 7 cents to the dollar on the dollar or more. That gap is the difference between saving for a house and giving up on one. Speaking of housing, for Canadians under 34, they don't dream of white picket fences. They dream of rent control. At least in the US, a young couple can actually buy a house before they need a hip replacement. And US youth unemployment is 10.8%. That's still fairly high. But in Canada, it's 14.5%. These aren't just abstract numbers. They mean missed opportunities, delayed careers, stalled ambitions. Young Canadians feel it. Survey after survey shows this. 37% of people between the ages of 18 to 24 cite jobs as a top issue facing this country. This is double the number last year. And 52% worry someone in their household will lose a job. But this isn't just about numbers, it's also about structure and mindset, and this is very important. Since the Great Depression, Canada's economy has been stifled by high taxes, heavy regulation, and entrenched oligopolies, whether it's airlines, banks, telecoms, groceries. 2 or 3 firms dominate every sector. And take the recent Air Canada strike, which I was a victim, along with hundreds of thousands of Canadians. In the US, a strike by one airline means half a dozen competitors step in. That's competition, which is good for consumers, but we don't like that here. Canada instead tolerates monopolies like government liquor boards, telling adults what they can drink, except here in Alberta, thank you very much, and socialized health and education systems so underfunded that patients wait months and top-notch professors and graduate students decamp to the US. But let me be clear, Canada was never utopia. Even when I arrived, socialism and red tape meant that supposed free healthcare and education were always a fiscal illusion, a ticking time bomb. Canada prizes security and equality of outcome over innovation and excellence. The result? Mediocrity and stagnation. In 2024, the US produced 45 times as many high-potential startups as Canada. Canada's share collapsed from nearly 5% in 2018 to just 1% last year. Canadian-led startups raise more money in the US than they do at home, here at home. And why is that? Because the US is friendlier to entrepreneurs, capital is abundant, regulations are lighter, and Canada just shackles innovators with red tape, high taxes, and policy whiplash. Remember the capital gains tax hike on entrepreneurs? That was only pulled back at the last minute recently. Meanwhile, the US raised the capital gains exemption for founders to $15 million US. Now you tell me, which country would you rather do business in under these conditions? US tech workers earn 46% more than Canadians, nearly $40,000 US extra each year. In Canada, high taxes punish ambition. There's a story of a young Turkish-born founder that I came across as I was preparing for this debate in the Globe and Mail. He launched an AI startup in Toronto, but he was staring at a visa process of 3 years in Canada. In the US, it took 13 days. He went on an O1 visa, which is for extraordinary individuals with extraordinary ability. Only Elon Musk and Melania Trump types qualify for it. And he's moving south, and his words, I love Toronto, but I want to make the best of my talent. How can you blame him? I'm an immigrant. I came here almost 30 years ago. And as an immigrant, I'm always asked, I was plugging this event on social media, and some people said, how ironic that you're saying this as an immigrant. Shouldn't you be grateful, Rupa? Shouldn't you be patriotic? Well, my answer is gratitude and patriotism don't mean blind loyalty to a failing system. They mean telling the truth. Successful societies prize individual liberty, not conformity. As Adam Smith reminded us more than 200 years ago, it's the pursuit of rational individual self-interest that produces the greatest good for society, and that is something that I truly believe in. And people are voting with their feet, by the way. The US Census Bureau's American Community Survey shows that the number of people moving from Canada to the US was about 126,000 in 2022. That's nearly 70% more from 2012. And of those, 53,000 were Canadian-born, and 30,000 were foreign-born immigrants to Canada moving to the US. The flow of talent is obvious. Canada's system simply discourages ambition and punishes excellence. I left once to pursue opportunities abroad, opportunities that simply didn't exist here, even with 3 Canadian degrees and experience. I returned to Canada not for financial reasons, but because my heart truly belongs here. Yet, even in Ottawa today, my professional work is with an American startup. No Canadian outlet has come knocking on my door the way my American boss did. That alone speaks volumes about where opportunity lies. So let me be clear, if you're under 30, ambitious, entrepreneurial, hungry for success, you should look south. There, talent and hard work are rewarded. Here, they're punished and suppressed. Just look at Wall Street, Silicon Valley, Austin, Miami, Texas, Hollywood. Many young Canadians are already there. I speak to them frequently for my stories. They know their chances of success are higher, and that is why the common sense choice before you is to support this motion that young people under 30 in Canada should move to the United States. Thank you.
Wow, I'm convinced.
Now, I neglected to ask you your vote. We'll just pretend you're a tabula rasa, a blank slate. And we won't ask you now. We'll pretend that you had no opinion either way, and we will take a vote at the end. Lawrence, be it resolved, young Canadians under 30 should leave Canada. You shall answer against this motion.
Okay, I didn't know what the motion was. No, I'm just joking. It looks like we're talking to the wrong crowd here also, but in any case, there are a few people under 30 here. I don't want to offend the others. But I want to state first that
They've already
the
left.
premise of this is interesting, but you can't make a generalization. There's no generic answer to whether you should come or go. It depends on your specific situation, your talents, your interests, your goals. And so I don't think we should imagine any universal answer to that question. It's impossible, and I think irresponsible to tell people in advance of knowing what their specific situation is about whether they should leave Canada or not. But I want to start talking about Canada first. And I want to say, first of all, Canada is woke in the extreme. There are extreme free speech concerns about government legislation like Bill C-63. There's legalized discrimination against white males in universities. There's a patronizing and inappropriate attitude towards Indigenous people that denies the realities of the world. I wrote a piece, in fact, for the Aristotle Foundation that appeared in the National Post about these nonsense about people being here since time immemorial, which they haven't. The foreign policy is sometimes ridiculous, as it was this week when the Canadian government recognized the state of Palestine that doesn't exist. Housing prices are too high. There's lack of productivity. And I just moved from Prince Edward Island, where I can assure you there are no doctors. So that's my argument for staying in Canada. No, my argument, and in fact, this is particularly appropriate because Mark, when he's driving us here, just presented a statue. My argument comes down to a quote from Winston Churchill, who you worked very hard, I understand, to have there's a statue downtown to Winston Churchill that hasn't been removed, much to my surprise. And he said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. And I think that's my view about Canada. So Canada has problems, but where are you going to go? So let's take the United States. The United States is now run by an autocrat. It's ruled by a narcissistic sociopath buffoon, dangerous buffoon. And I really mean that in a true way. The dangers that occur to people are such that Congress is afraid, journalists are afraid, Hollywood is afraid, James Comey is afraid as of a few hours ago. If you are an enemy of the state, in any way, and not an enemy of the state, an enemy of the autocrat who's ruling the state, then you are subject to legal sanctions right now. If you are an immigrant, a Canadian wanting to move to the States, you have to worry about what you say. In fact, many people who've come to the United States, and many young people I know who've come in science, who've come to a university with Ph.D.s to do postgraduate work or postdoctoral work, the first thing that's done is they check your social media posts to see if you said anything about negative about the U.S. government. And if you have, you're generally rejected right at the border. It is a real severe. This isn't hypothetical. I was just in California, in Ojai, and near Santa Barbara, and I was actually talking to a young woman who happens to have been undocumented, and now she's got a permanent resident visa. But in Santa Barbara, where she goes, to her hairdressing salon, they lock the doors when you come in and out because the ICE agents are not allowed in if the doors are locked. Otherwise, they'll come in and just remove people without. They'll wear masks. It is a country that you wouldn't have expected to be in years ago. Well, I'll talk about that more in detail. But the United States is a country that's got severe problems, and it is got a non-functioning government run by an autocrat. And we'll talk about the fact that it's been great to do science in the United States. That's the past tense. Not only are major grants being cut in almost every area of science, but strong efforts, as I'll talk about later, have been done to remove the opportunities for good young scientists and entrepreneurs to come into the country. And well, I'll say it now because I'll probably go overtime anyway. if you want to go to the United States and you want to get an H-1B visa, which universities, when I was chair of a physics department, we used to give to good young postdocs, as you probably know now, that has been changed. So the cost of that is now $100,000 per year. So your university isn't going to pay for it. And a lot, I just came from Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley is hurting. If you're a young, talented person, the ability to come to the United States has been reduced, and it's going to destroy the infrastructure of the United States, which is dependent on what Rupa is talking about, dependent upon the best young people from around the world coming to the United States. Some of them go back to their countries, some of them stay. Elon Musk, for better or worse, and that is now being that infrastructure is being destroyed. So the United States is and its productivity, its ability to do entrepreneurship, its ability to do first-class science is rapidly being destroyed by the U.S. government. So you don't want to move to the U.S. Well, UK. Well, there you get arrested for being Jewish if you're at a Palestinian rally, or you're arrested if you question whether there are two sexes, or you get arrested for complaining about Islamic violence against women, young women. The people who make the complaints are being arrested. In fact, one of the things you didn't state is I happen to be happy to be the chairman of the board of the Free Speech Union of Canada, which is an offshoot of the Free Speech Union in the United Kingdom, which is very, very busy because there's no such thing as free speech in the United Kingdom. France, if you go to France, you're overrun by Islamic groups, and you have to watch where you walk. Take Australia, where I used to spend a lot of time. Well, it's kind of like Canada. It's kind of woke. There are bombings regularly on synagogues. And it only exists, its economy, as far as I can tell, only exists by selling coal to China. And since China is reducing that, we'll see what happens. Now, when people talk about and I'm not an economist, happily, but when people talk about Canada versus the U.S., they're always talking about averages. So I decided to look, since I didn't know, I thought I'd do a little research. And averages don't mean a lot. The United States, as Canada, is quite a diverse country. It's very different. I've lived in 5 different states in time there, and they're all very different. And when you say that housing is more expensive here, well, I've lived in Boston. I've lived near New York. I've lived in Arizona, which actually is cheap for good reasons. It's hellish to live there. And I most recently did in Oregon, and I spent time in San Francisco. But so I decided to look at Numbeo, which gives numbers, and I thought, well, we're in Calgary, so it compares Calgary to Dallas, because I guess Calgary is the Dallas of Canada, whether you like it or not. Cost of living is 8.9% higher in Dallas. The cost of living, including rent, is 18.9% higher in Dallas. The rent in Dallas is 44% higher. Restaurants cost 14% more. Groceries are 6% higher. Now, the local purchasing power, however, is much better because the salaries are much bigger. Okay, but in Dallas, you have to earn the effectively $9.3 thousand per month to live on some certain Canadian dollars versus 7.9% in Calgary. Now, having said that, this goes into utilities and transportation and childcare and everything else. But when you talk about going to the United States, because I've lived there, you have to talk about public transportation, you have to talk about schooling, and we'll get to some of this, some of these hidden expenses. You can go to public school if you don't mind your children being searched for guns every day. I looked at Calgary. It's comparable cost of living to most major cities around the world, including U.S. cities. It's less expensive than Dallas and New York and Victoria and Sydney and London and Berlin. The cities that it's more expensive than are Prague and Beijing. Okay, so you can move there.
2-minute warning.
What?
2-minute warning.
Okay, it doesn't matter. I'm not really saying anything useful. The United States, on average, it turns out I looked, is 10% more expensive in the U.S. than Canada. Healthcare, of course, I can say this. One of the reasons I moved back had to do with healthcare, which used to cost me $1,800 a month in the United States. And it's worse, of course, if you go to the United States as an entrepreneur, but you don't have a job, you don't have no healthcare. You only have healthcare in the United States if you have a job. When you need healthcare, which is when you're out of work, you don't have healthcare. And that's happened to my daughter several times. Childcare, for example, quality of life. My secretary in my last position got 3 weeks paid leave after being pregnant, after having a child, 3 whole weeks. home. Now you got to ask that compared to here. Education, I paid, in order that my daughter didn't have to go through a gun metal detector to go to school in Cleveland, I paid $18,000 a year for private school. Then I've had a daughter and a stepdaughter, and I paid for each of them between $50,000 and $70,000 per year to go to university. Last bit, housing. Okay, my house in Portland was about $1 million, okay? I moved to PEI where I was able to get a much bigger house for much less. But then I just moved to Victoria, and it's about the same as it was in Portland. I know Victoria is very expensive. So when one talks about all these things and averages, one has to look at averages don't mean a lot. And the last thing I'll say, since I'm going to go over time, is two things. One, in the United States, there's a divide. Half the country hates the other half of the country. In Canada, it's not quite that way. The West may hate the East, but it's not the level of hatred that I see in the United States on a daily basis. Young people are unhappy in Canada, but it turns out they're unhappy in the United States. In the World Happiness Index, they're all unhappy, young people. By the way, Canada is higher on the World Happiness Index for young people than the United States. Canada is 18, the United States is 24. Last, how would Canada look as the 51st state? It would be number 1 in college degrees, number 1 in life expectancy, number 46 in homicide rates, number 4 in GDP, although if you took GDP per capita, it'd be at the bottom. So the bottom line is, I think the decision to move out of Canada is an emotional issue and a personal one, but there's no objective evidence to me that you should move outside Canada. That's it.
Thank you. Well, let's start with the questions. And Lawrence, you will have to buy Rupa wine later tonight for the overtime.
Oh, okay, I'll be happy to do that. I'd be happy to have wine right now, actually.
Let's start with Rupa. Rupa, man, if I can say that word in this day and age, does not live by bread or income alone. So Canada is relatively poor compared with the United States, and Lawrence has debated you on that, and we're more expensive and lacks the opportunity it once did. But in Canada, school and church shootings are unheard of. The last time a political assassination occurred was in the early 1970s because of the FLQ. In Quebec, and elections, with the exception of the 1995 Quebec referendum, are usually pretty clean up here. So, isn't there a lot to be said for our peaceful Northern Kingdom, Rupa?
So, thank you, Mark. I would challenge your assertion that we're somehow peaceful. Actually, there's someone here from the Fraser Institute, and I refer to them all the time, on this one report about crime in Canada. We're actually not doing too well there. I have the numbers here somewhere. I think violent crime in Canada, rose 44% from 2014 to 2020. From 2014 to 2022, compared with just 5% in the US over the same time period. You know, homicide rates have also increased, robbery, aggravated assault, while they've actually declined in the US. Honestly, you know, my own personal experience, I feel safer walking in DC, I was last there in February, than I do in Ottawa. In Ottawa, I've had a break-in, someone tried to break into my condo at 4 a.m. Last year. That's never happened to me. I've lived in all kinds of places around the world. I've lived in Mumbai, I've lived in, I've spent time in Los Angeles, I've lived in New York, and this has never happened to me. I live steps from Parliament, but this happened to me here in Ottawa. So if you're looking for a peaceful, boring, placid existence, let's say that Canada truly is peaceful, Ottawa is a very peaceful society, what you're getting is, you're getting an overregulated, socialized economy that and high taxes and dwindling freedom of expression. Hopefully we'll come to that, because one of the reasons when I first came to Canada, I lived in very illiberal authoritarian places, and when I came here, it was a breath of fresh air, and this is where I intellectually developed, and all of that is also deteriorating in this country, along with the economy. They're both circling the drain. And in Canada, what we have socialism, which sadly breeds mediocrity and the tall poppy syndrome, and I see it all the time. Many people say that they've experienced. The point is with the US, despite all of its problems, it has a Darwinian ethos, right? You either sink or swim, and the sky is the limit as far as your ambition is concerned. You work hard, you achieve your dreams, and all of that is still possible in the US despite all of the problems right now. So, but that doesn't mean the US is perfect. No place is actually. And in terms of quality of life and not just money, the US is definitely better than Canada.
Should we allow, Lawrence, would you like to respond? Or can I parlay off of one point that Rupa has made? Free speech. In Canada, we've had restrictions on free speech at election time since Pierre Trudeau. The bills that keep getting introduced in Parliament would restrict your speech in general if you're critical of maybe someone of faith, or you're just, you're considered to be engaged in hate speech by having critical thought. Isn't this a problem for young Canadians who may want to be free and think free?
Well, the advantage of Canada there is that in Canada, the attacks on free speech are just coming from the left. In the United States, we're lucky enough when I'm there, it's to have free speech attacks from both sides. And so there's the same attacks on free speech, in the book, in The War on Science, people being removed from jobs at Harvard for saying they're two sexes. All of that. And now you get, Jimmy Kimmel from the right. If you say something, you can literally be removed from the airwaves. And so there are severe attacks on free speech. The difference is, and there is a difference, in Canada, it's legalized. In the United States, it's just de facto. And in the United States, there's supposed to be a freedom of speech, but in fact, there often isn't. The only thing I'll say to Rupa's remarks, and by the way, I don't have a dog in this fight, so I don't. But it's nice to say that violent crimes or homicides in Canada have increased by that amount, and much smaller percent in the United States. That's because the United States couldn't increase much more. Okay, it was already its rate of violent crimes is already 4 times greater than Canada, and so. While we pointed out that it's true, the only time I've ever had a gun pointed at me was in Ottawa. I will get that. There's zero doubt that it's much less safe in cities. My daughter happens to live in Nashville. I've just helped her buy a new house because of the kids in a reasonable neighborhood that are now playing with AK-47s nearby and shooting them off. And I have a friend who did exactly the same thing in San Francisco. Quite clear that the United States is a less safe place in general. But once again, the whole point about this is that averages don't mean anything. Housing prices are much cheaper and you want to live in Mississippi, but who the hell wants to live in Mississippi? And similarly, in American cities, it's less safe. In rural areas, it may not be. I think it just depends where you want to live.
On free speech, it's important to keep this in mind that despite everything that is happening in the U.S., they have constitutional protections to free speech. We do not have that here. The Bill of Rights with the 10 amendments, the First Amendment is the right to free expression. That is constitutionally protected. Unlike here, we have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is, as my friend Bruce Party at Queen's University says, it's not worth the paper it's printed on because it's just totally useless. You can have the notwithstanding clause, you can invoke that, and then there's no free speech anymore. And we saw that during the pandemic. There is no notwithstanding clause.
No, I agree. That's why I'm head of the Free Speech Union, along with Bruce Party's on the board. But again, you're absolutely right. I would love this country if it had, some entrenched legal free speech. But it's legal in the United States in principle. There's a constitutional clause that says it should be legal. But you see it being restricted in all areas of academia. People talking about not just gender issues, but indigenous issues. And even science issues, and now you see people being removed from the airwaves from the right if they criticize the president.
I sense violent agreement here on free speech, so I'm going to move on to the next question for Lawrence, which is, Lawrence, young Canadians are likely to be mainly healthy, and you mentioned some healthcare costs in the United States, monthly healthcare costs. Perhaps, though, they don't have to worry about expensive U.S. healthcare insurance premiums while they're young, and as a result, maybe they should pack up for a decade or 2 or 3 or 4 and go south and profit from higher incomes, lower taxes, lower housing costs, and then move back to Canada when they're closer to retirement to take advantage of the healthcare system, which is free but perhaps not all that effective. But shouldn't they just go down south anyway because they're not going to pay the high health care insurance premiums you mentioned?
Yeah, look, if you'd say, okay, I'm going to go down to the United States, I'm going to get a good job, and I'll live there. That's fine if you can do that, okay? But most people who are immigrating have to first find the job, and as I say, if you don't have a job, you don't have any health care in Canada. And I've seen it specifically or in the United States, when my daughter when she was out of work, she didn't have any. And nowadays, it's Canadians cannot just go down and get jobs. As I say, the H-1Bs are now out. The main way of getting a job was the H-1B visa, which would give you can go as a visiting person if you're, say, a scientist, a J-1 visa, but that means you have to go back to your country, or an H-1B. Now it's $100,000. Canadians who are moving there, well, they got to move there with some security. They're going to move there with Canadian savings, and they're going to have immediately a 30% premium on every dollar that they own. So when you talk about the expense of a house in Canada, it's automatically 30% less than the comparable house in the United States, just because of the Canadian dollar. Then you've also got to talk about the fact that young people may have children, and they have to worry about the cost of educating their children and putting them in schools that are safe. And the last thing is they have to decide if they're going to look for opportunities, and there are many more opportunities in the United States, I'll agree with that. Generally, you have to go to the cities that have the opportunities: Boston, New York, Chicago, San Francisco. And those cities cost an incredible amount. I mean, I left my job at Harvard and moved to Yale because I could not afford to live in Boston on what Harvard paid me. And I had to go to Yale because New Haven is a dump.
Yeah, so two things, Lawrence. One on the visa thing. So Canadians can work in the U.S. on a TN visa. We have all kinds of agreements under USMCA that allows us to go there, unlike any other country out there. So, and what we're discussing right now is not a new phenomena. This has been in motion for decades now, whether it's people pursuing their dreams in Hollywood, or professors leaving, or entrepreneurs. And so none of this is new. And so, I think when you say that, if you're a Canadian and you want to go to the US, you've got to have some security, you have to have some savings. All of that goes without saying, obviously. But how do you explain that for decades, people have done exactly that, maybe with nothing, and just walked across the border and pursued their dreams and became very successful? So, I don't see the H-1B visa issue as an obstacle for Canadians, because you can still work in the U.S. on a range of other visas.
All the Americans I know, I mean, all the university people I know, and all the people in Silicon Valley say it's a disaster. But we'll see what happens.
And having said that, just one last point: the H-1B visa, and I say this because I'm in two minds about it. I want skilled immigrants to come to Canada and the U.S., but at the same time, I've seen how that system is being abused in the U.S. There are people who shouldn't be getting an H-1B visa, but yet that's been happening for the last 20 years or so. And so the Trump administration has a point here. I think even supporters of the H-1B visa will tell you that the system needed an overhaul and it needed improving. Right now, with the $100,000, I think he's incentivizing, and my reading of it is that he's incentivizing top talent. Really, really, like some of the best people in the world are going to come to the United States.
Well, it's $100,000 per year, by the way, not just not a one thing. It's $100,000 per year that you have to renew it, and that's certainly going to be some kind of problem. I should say also that the other thing about moving to the States is interesting. Canada, if you don't have a university degree, your income level is much higher in Canada than the United States. In the United States, there's a much bigger divide between people who have university degrees. There's a much bigger wealth-poverty divide. And in Canada, you can have a living wage if you don't have a university degree. And that's particularly important now, because more and more males in Canada are not getting university degrees because there's discrimination against them at universities.
That's because we have the oil sands in Alberta, which provides a lot of money to a lot of people in the country. That's why young males are doing well, or have been doing well. Let's go to Rupa now for a question. Rupa, you encourage young Canadians to leave, but let's think about this. They might leave then for 30, 40 years. They'll be back when they're 55 or 65 for free healthcare. So they'll be gone for 30 years. They'll pay no taxes in Canada for 30 or 40 years. But then they'll want all the free stuff when they come back. So to be consistent with your policy, should Canada change its citizenship rules that If you leave and you're gone for 10 years, you can't come back.
I don't know what this free stuff is that you refer to, because our healthcare system is collapsing. Wait times here are way worse than they are in the US. I think it takes a day or two to get an MRI scan in the US versus I think the average here is like 24 days, something like that. 2 hours wait time here in an emergency room, whereas in the US you get seen right away. So what exactly are these people returning to? They're returning to a very dysfunctional system. But having said that, I do think there's one thing that Canada could do is that, and I'm not for revoking someone's citizenship because they went abroad to pursue their dreams. I think that you don't want to punish people for doing that. I think what you could do is you could tax Canadians who live overseas on their worldwide income. We don't have that policy here, and that could be an option if you feel that these people are returning to a system that they haven't contributed to. But the point is that. Ultimately, I mean, and the revoking of citizenship, no democracy in the world does that. This is not how Western liberal democracies work. So I'm not in favor of that. So the point is, the fact that you're even asking me this question about revoking citizenship just tells me how dire the situation here is. Because if everybody was doing well, you wouldn't have to ask this question.
Lawrence, do you want to respond?
Having gone to emergency rooms in the U.S., I can tell you it's a lot longer wait. But I agree. There's a huge problem with doctors here. But I think that, and there's another thing. You are taxed on your worldwide income. I discovered that to my chagrin when I moved back here. I'm taxed on my American income, and I pay tax twice actually to come here. But I do agree. I think at some point, your point is well made. I don't think you can revoke citizenship for people going abroad, and it's funny. I see on Twitter people coming when I've complained about. I wrote a piece in the National Post saying free medical care is not the same as no medical care. And people said, well, you lived in the United States and didn't contribute your whole life, and now you're wanting to do that. But now, having moved back here, I'm happily contributing, well, not happily, but I'm reasonably contributing all the money I earn in the United States to the Canadian economy.
Prince Edward Island does have high tax rates. People forget that.
Good. Well, I just moved to BC, so we'll see. It's a socialist country.
Devil or deep blue sea, yes. PI and BC. Let's go to both of you in this. Lawrence and Rupa, both of you have been immigrants to Canada. Lawrence, twice in your youth and in your quasi-retirement. For both of you, though, what first attracted you to Canada, and what has changed?
Well, I first moved to Canada when I was 3 months old, and what attracted me at the time was I was born in New York City. I didn't want to have the accent, and so that's why I moved to Canada when I was 3 months old. I convinced my parents. But the second time I moved, which was a little less facetious, was in 2020, and I moved for a variety of reasons. For sanity reasons, the United States was quickly becoming a dysfunctional government, a dysfunctional society, as far as I could see. I also moved at the time because of healthcare. As I was getting older, it's not that, as you point out, the young people don't get sick, but it's catastrophic in the United States. You can lose everything if you have a serious disease. I moved because of the quality of life, the fact that, and the cost of living, which at the time was much less for me when I moved to PEI from Oregon. And some of them, I have to say, having moved, it's a wake-up call on some of those things that I wasn't anticipating. As I say, healthcare is a much bigger concern to me. Although my mother, who was 100, moved in with me and had great health care for when she was in an emergency. So I moved for the reasons that I think you want to move to Canada.
I sense violent agreement coming again. Rupa, you mentioned a little bit about why you were attracted to Canada, and the advantages 30 years ago. Can you expand on that and again summarize what you think has changed?
Yeah, well, in my opening statement, I told you what's changed in the last 30 years. Productivity growth is basically zero in this country. Per capita income levels were 85 to 90% of the U.S. level back in the 80s and the 90s, but they're basically at 70% right now. So that's clearly changed, and all of the problems that I mentioned to you in my opening statement especially for young people when it comes to housing, high taxes, overly regulated economy, and all of that. But I came here, when I came here as a teenager to pursue an education as an international student, back when international students had a good reputation, I didn't know much about Canada. I thought it was an extension of the U.S. And I wanted to pursue a liberal arts education. I went to Acadia University in Nova Scotia. I'd never been to Canada before. I wind up in a small town from Dubai, and it was a very interesting experience. And my parents could afford to pay for my tuition fees. It would have been double that in the U.S. But also, as I said earlier, that for me, when I came here, what has also changed is that when I came here, I came to a free society. What's happening now is just, I don't recognize it anymore. There was a time when you could, when I would go to my classes and engage in fierce debates with my professors and my friends and my classmates, and then we'd all go out and have a drink at the local pub, and everything was just water under the bridge, and then we'd continue arguing again and again and again and again. But what's happened now is that, you say, Lawrence, that in the U.S. You have one half of the country hates the other half. That's also happening here now, by the way. I personally, I can speak from my own personal experience, and it's certainly, you see that on social media, you see that in all aspects of Canadian life. And so that's changed for me. So we're in a very bad place here, and I cannot, just stress how important, the importance of the time that we're living in. We have an economy that is not doing well at all. We've had no growth for 6 years. No growth. We're getting towards the lost decade. That's not a good place to be in. And then you have immigration, which is now, thankfully, that's starting to come down. But all of these people are here. We don't have the rule of law. Our cities are descending into lawlessness. I write about it for the Free Press. So what is the incentive to be here in Canada if you're a young person, with fire in your belly, and you want to, and you have the ambition and you want to succeed? What's the incentive to stay here?
Let me just say one thing, because you were an international student here, and this really hits home for me, seeing students now. It's less free here, there's no doubt, and I'm fighting to make it more free. But if you're an international student in Canada, I don't think, and I could be wrong, that if you speak out or write a piece criticizing the Canadian government, that you'll be arrested and deported. In the United States right now, it's happened to many students that I know of who have been, in one way or another, either in their social media 10 years ago, written something critical of the US government, have been arrested and detained and open for deportation. So right now, if you're an international student, you'd better not speak out against the US government in any way, shape, or form, or you're risking arrest and deportation. And that is a level of attack on free speech that I don't think exists in Canada.
So one last question for you both, and I'll phrase it a different way for each one of you, and then we'll get to the closing statements. Free speech aside, if you can put it aside for a moment, with the great, country that the United States is in terms of opportunities historically. Maybe the enter a recession like we do in the next little while, but historically it's been pretty good at providing opportunity for a lot of people around the world. Canada somewhat similarly, but perhaps not in the last while. But Lawrence, in your youth you had moved to the United States. Doesn't it make sense to really advocate that for young Canadians today to pursue opportunities in the United States? And that'll be kind of for you. And Rupa, phrased slightly differently, you've taken the affirmative position tonight that Canadians under 30 should leave. Now, granted, at age 31, you're just over that 30-year mark. But have you been tempted to leave? And if not, why have you not made the leap to the United States or elsewhere? Well, let's start with Lawrence. Shouldn't they take the opportunities you did when you were young and come back to the peaceable Northern Kingdom that Rupa so heartily and disputed?
Well, look, as I said before, I think every young person should think about what they want to do. When I moved, it was before Rupa was born, I moved in 1977 to go to MIT, and it was a very different country then. I mean, as a physicist, it was not the options were in the United States, and that has changed. I mean, Canada's working very hard to stop that. But as far as I'm concerned, to go against the improvements that have happened. Right now, they're first-rate institutions in Canada to do physics and to do science. And so the reason I left at the time was non-existent now, I think. And then it is true that I considered at various times I received offers to come back to Canada, and did not do so for a variety of reasons, some of which are related to what we're talking about. In my case, some of them were cost of living issues. Others were related to issues when I was asked to be a president of the university, for example, reasons not wanting to come back. But I think it was different for me. But I would say that any young person who sees an opportunity for them that's better elsewhere should go there. But what's clear to me is that for many young people in Canada, and maybe the majority of young people in Canada, the opportunities in Canada exist, and it isn't so obvious as it was for me, especially people who don't have a college education.
Rupa, are you tempted to leave? And if so, what's holding you back? There must be some nascent, deep love of the country and its opportunities for you still.
Look, I mean, as you get older, it gets harder to, leave a place.
Yeah.
I've already left. Like, I've been on the move since I was a kid, and I'm happy where I am right now. But that doesn't mean that if an opportunity doesn't come up for me in the U.S., it doesn't mean that I'm not going to take that, because I believe in what the pursuit of pursuing your interests and your dreams, and I'll do that as long as as I'm alive. But so it gets harder to move as you get older. Mm-hmm. And right now at my stage, at this stage in my life, I'm actually working for an American publication, sitting in Ottawa, writing about Canada. I feel like I've the best of both worlds, and I'm able to make that work. But I don't rule out the possibility of moving at some point. And like all of my other, when I moved previously in the past, I've always returned to Canada. So even if I move to the US, I'm going to come back at some point. Not for healthcare, because it's a total disaster.
Unless you get really sick, then you might want to come back.
I see broad violence.
I'm going to go to India, actually, which is where my parents live.
Yes, I wish we had
there.
more Indian doctors. I think we should bring them.
Broad violent agreement on the problems in Canadian healthcare. Actually, one last question, then we will go to closing arguments here. So 30-second answer maximum. I'll try and time it this time. What is one thing, if you could wave a wand and change about Canada, make it more attractive to someone under 30, you would do? Let's start with Lawrence.
Oh, I think it's have merit come back and be the deciding factor for jobs. That's just quite simple. It should be a merit system. That's all.
I agree, but I'll also say that cut taxes across the board, not these stupid things that we've been seeing during the election campaign. Pardon my language. You need like ambitious tax cuts that'll incentivize young people to stay on, to keep more of their money and invest in their future. That's one thing. But there isn't a simple solution to fix the problems, because the problems that I see, that I've been trying to explain this evening, they're structural. It's socialism. As long as you have the system in place, you're not gonna, you're just gonna patch things up here and there. You need a fundamental reform of the system where people have to start asking the tough questions. Is this system benefiting us anymore? So
I think the answer was cut taxes. That was the short answer.
Yeah.
And since I took less than 30, can I just say yes? Except it's clear that in Canada, in the United States, you pay far less taxes if you're wealthy, far more taxes if you're poor. So if you're doing really well, you want to cut taxes.
I was about to compliment Rupa as one of the former directors of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I was going to say you warmed my heart when you said cut taxes, Rupa. So that was indeed the correct answer. Well, let's now go to closing arguments. And let's remember the resolution again, which is, be it resolved that young Canadians under 30 should leave the country. And we began with, we began with Rupa. So Lawrence, We will begin with you and allow Rupa to have the final word.
Good, excellent. Well, I hadn't planned any closing arguments because I think I've been so cogent that I didn't need them. But I will say once again, I think the key point is that that it is a ridiculous statement to advise young people en masse to do anything. They won't listen, among other things. But it's clear that there are many reasons to go and there are many reasons to stay. But there's no objective evidence that leaving Canada is good for all young people. And as a result, I think it's clear that one should say no, young people in Canada should not leave the country. And that's a much shorter answer, but it means if there's more drinking, we can do it afterwards.
Rupa, you have the final word.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for your excellent moderation and the questions. And thank you, Lawrence, for your very spirited argument against the motion. It could not have been easy, but I think I had an easier time dumping on Canada than you defending it. So I'd like to reiterate that when you guys vote in a few minutes, you ought to vote in favor of the motion, of course. The facts are clear, and I went through that through the numbers in my opening statement that back them up. Young Canadians are struggling and are doing much worse than their American counterparts. Any young person in Canada who's ambitious, talented, hardworking, and wants to succeed and is willing to take the risks rather than complacently do a soul-crushing job, a 9-to-5 job, and look forward to their pension 40 years later, you need to look south. Whether you're an entrepreneur, an investment banker, a lawyer, an academic, an artist, sports person, your prospects are much brighter in the free-for-all capitalist ethos in the U.S., where talent is rewarded, than in the stifling, overregulated, overtaxed, bureaucratized world of Canada. That is pretty much every sector in our economy, by the way. I don't know how many of you know that 40% of the economy in Canada is socialized. So no wonder, many of our best and brightest have already moved to the U.S. To seek a better life, and the talent keeps on moving. So it may feel patriotic to say that all is well in Canada and that we're better than America, but that simply doesn't correspond to reality. It's not patriotism, but a blinkered and provincial attitude that is unwilling to recognize that regardless of the field you're in, unless you aspire to a cushy civil service job in Ottawa where you basically do nothing meaningful or productive and just dream of your pension, you have a much greater shot at making it big south of the border. And this is why America, despite all of its current problems, continues to be a beacon to the most talented and ambitious young people from every corner of the globe. And speaking of America right now, look, every great society goes through these churns. The 60s in America, JFK assassination, RFK's assassination, the Vietnam War after, and it's gone through so many churns, but it's always come back. And I can't think of any country in this world that has done something similar. But to be fair, at first glance, it does seem like under 30 Canadians to the U.S., fleeing to the U.S., it looks like a brain drain. But I think in practice, it's more like a brain bank. They gain experience, they have connections, network, and when they return home, if and when they return home, they bring back skills and networks to Canada, which Canada couldn't have built alone. And this is very useful to have. And even those who don't come back outright, I think, create what economists call a diaspora dividend. And I should know this quite well because the Indian diaspora communities and the Chinese diaspora communities have done similar for India and China. They're unofficial ambassadors. They funnel investment, contracts, and opportunities back to Canadian firms. But at the end of the day, I mean, this is an important issue. Out-migration should be a wake-up call for our policymakers. If talented Canadians feel that they must leave to succeed, Canada can't ignore that. This exodus, I think, which has been in motion for the last several decades, should force policymakers to rethink things like tax burdens, licensing barriers, housing supply, innovation incentives, you name it. And in other words, I think that young Canadians voting with their feet may be the jolt that Canada needs. Canadian policymakers need to get serious about fixing our house in order. And so to sum up, if you're young, talented, and ambitious, America is the place you want to be. And I urge you to vote in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rupa. Thank you, Lawrence. Although I think Rupa just amended the motion to be about America as opposed to the worldwide, but that's okay. But that's okay. So keep that in mind. The good tweak, though. Good last throw in there. So let's do this. I'm going to enlist Danny to be the vote counter here. And if you turn around, and we'll start with be it resolved, young Canadians under 30 should leave Canada. If you are in favor of that, in other words, Rupa's position, please put up your hand now. Keep them up, and Danny will quickly count. Perfect. And then, be it resolved, young Canadians under 30 should leave Canada. You're against the motion. You are in favor of Lawrence's position. Please put up your hands. Lawrence wins.
Oh. Do I get a prize? I don't know what I hope you get it. Well, that's totally unexpected.
Aristotle, after whom he named this think tank, you may have heard this, but he asserted that human beings are distinct from animals in this way: our ability to use language and to think through matters, to reason our way forward through the use of speech. And you've seen an example of that tonight. So thank you, Rupa and Lawrence. And thank you, the attendees. Good night.